Good morning, great souls. So good to be with you. I have to talk a little bit about the play. When Yudhishthira was saying it won't be remembered, I thought, what? Maybe the details, right? I understand that. But the energy and vibrancy of the play, I heard so many people write about it. James has been helping with it, so he saw every performance. But I saw it yesterday. And it was so deeply moving, just profound. Rose did such an amazing job writing this story, and the children performing it with such heart and commitment, and all the teachers, all the staff. In the set, everything was just beautiful. So I really want to acknowledge with gratitude the gift that the school gives us each year to do this play, to teach, because the children learn that way. I learn every time, right? I was talking to a friend yesterday, and it was so interesting. She said, "Who is Luther Burbank?" I said, "Oh, you don't know?" And she thought the play was about Martin Luther, who founded the Lutheran Church. And I said, "Well, you're in for a treat. You're going to know all about Luther Burbank at the end of this." I learned a lot. And in such a joyful, amazing, uplifting way. And I felt that, to me, it really fits in with this theme of we are children of the light. And as I was preparing for the talk, one of the things I've been doing, Shanti had recommended, is to read The Promise of Immortality, which is the first 6 months of our readings. Swami Kriyananda did an expanded version of the readings and commentary, and it is very rich. And I took her word. She said, I recommend go home and read whatever the Sunday service is, and then certainly if you're preparing. So what Swami talked about, which is in our reading today, and then he expanded on this idea that, as it says at the very end, in order to perceive God, we need to live in that uplifted consciousness. So our consciousness needs to be centered in light, not in darkness. And the reason I'm mentioning how this fits in with the play is because it's so uplifting and filled with light. So it's one of those practices that can help, and certainly I experience this, to bring the heart and body and mind into a divine reality. This is a play about a saint, right? And so to hear his life and how he honored this journey of intuition and also the setbacks in life, right? He had setbacks. We all, I will say I have, and that's often part of the human journey, are these unexpected setbacks, and how not to lose faith, how not to become discouraged. There was some moment, I forget, there's so many wonderful lines, but one of them, he just really, Luther Burbank, there was this moment, there was some setback, he had several, but, now I can't remember how he said it, but basically, I think it was his sister said, "Oh, you're such an optimist," right? But he was like, "I will not be deterred, I will not be deterred." And it is such a beautiful example of how to move forward. How do we do this? And as I was, again, reflecting on the reading, just different things came to mind, but one of them, Yudhishthira and I lead a course called Yoga and the 12 Steps. And part of why that course was in my mind, aside from the fact that we're in the middle of teaching it right now, is that it's yoga, which really, yoga very much represents the light. The 12 steps do as well. It's a spiritual path, if anyone knows it. So it is a path of spiritual awakening. What's interesting about it is that it begins, in most cases, most people come to the 12 steps because of addiction, which is quite dark, heavy, difficult, right? And so part of why I'm mentioning it is that my ministry has been very much a ministry of, my own spiritual journey of walking through the dark and finding the light and staying connected to the light. And so and addiction, I have that history of addiction, right? So Some years ago, James and I went and had a Vedic reading, astrological reading. It's very powerful, and I recommend it if you can have a reading. If these teachings and this path call to you, whether you consider yourself a disciple or not, but certainly if you do consider yourself a disciple, to have a reading from someone who follows these teachings. Because my understanding, and certainly it was my experience, they have a way. The point of the Vedic astrology is it's our soul's purpose. Why are we here? What is this incarnation about? What's the theme of this incarnation? And what I was told, and it resonated for me, is transformation. I said, transformation is a theme it's a life theme for you. This is, Drupada was saying this to me, and I was already in recovery at that point. And I had just seen that in my life, that resonated. But he made a point of saying to me, now that's different than transcendence, right? So transformation means you will walk through the dark and difficulty, and in it find gold, right? You will transform the gold through the practices, through the teachings, and that will be, the experience will be transformed into light. It's difficult. Now, that is true. I just said yes, but he's a man, very intentional, and I could just feel he was emphasizing that for a reason, just to say to me, it's not easy. Now, the other part of that is that I've watched how, as I started to say, my ministry has been very much a ministry of walking with people who have experienced a profound setback. Often students who I work with individually, that's part of why they come to me. And to be able to offer these teachings, the promise of immortality, the teaching of do not identify with the experience that you're in. Be honest about it. It doesn't help to not be honest about it. You need to speak the truth of what it is you're walking through, but how to do that in a way where you're living in a higher reality, a higher identity. When yoga came into my life, I'd been part of 12 Steps for 15 years, and it was a very positive experience for me. But what I noticed with yoga and people at Ananda is everyone was really emanating this light. And if you ask anyone how they're doing, how are things going, I am well. It's a common thing to respond to that question with an affirmation. It's not false. It's not I'm pretending to be okay, but I'm not really okay at all. That's not, and I could sense it, I could feel it. And I remember being up at the Expanding Light on an extended retreat, and I was walking the hills, and it occurred to me that part of the lightness I felt there is that everyone was self-contained in their energy. So I was meeting wonderful people, but I could sense that no one needed anything from me. And I thought, that's interesting, and I could really feel it. What's that like? What's that like to be with people who are centered in joy? Whatever they're walking through, they're connected to something so strongly that that's the greater reality that's coming through. They might mention a challenge, but almost never did. And I would think, what is this? What's this like? So in our class, in the Yoga and 12 Steps, we came into a conversation about this transition, which Swami talks about. When you've been through difficulty, the decision to let that go, to let it go, to say, it's true, I walked through that. It's not who I am. And from that, as we move forward, even if other difficulties come in, we learn how to say, okay, I'm experiencing this. I love what Letty read in the Whispers, wherever she is, there she is. Right, I just love that one, right? The bleeding sheep. The challenges of life is that it's just so easy to forget who we are. And the teachings of saying, be honest, be real, but do not identify with that. And so the conversation we had in class was the real challenge that can present to, what is it like? One of my students has, I have had several students with chronic illness, chronic pain. It's really a tough one if you have that or know anyone with that. Boy, it can be hard on the consciousness. how to stay in the light when that's a reality. And one of the things we practiced with for her was to stop talking about her health, right? And it was radical. I was like, what do you mean? I said, well, just imagine, not saying anything about it. Because it's true, it's a reality, and this isn't about denying your health. But what she found is because it was dragging her consciousness down, and she'd have all these conversations, and she'd kind of walk away from them feeling uncomfortable, like, oh, I told too much, and I didn't really want to talk about not feeling well, but they asked how I was, and so we practiced that together. What is it to be sincere, because she followed these teachings, to affirm something that was more light-filled without denying her reality. How to do that, right? And basically the practice was say less, not more, right? Let silence be there. It's okay. We don't have to, one thing I learned early on in recovery, because I was going through a hard time, it took me a while to get centered in the light. It was a journey to get there, right? So how do I speak the light when I'm having a hard time? And I learned this one definitely in yoga. So if I might be at an event and having a hard time within, and how are you? So happy to see you. I'm so happy to see you. It's true. I was so happy to, I don't have to talk about I'm having a hard time unless I need to. So there's safe places, and I encourage people, I practice this myself. If I need to share the difficulty, I want to share it with someone who will remind me of what Letty was reading today, that I am a lion, that my soul is infinite, that I am a child of the light. And so to compassionately hold my experience, to name it realistically, and boy, this really comes up in sobriety. Another thing we've talked about in the group that can be challenging is identifying with that history, because one of the things you may or may not know, but in 12 steps, it's very common to maintain the identification and the label when you introduce yourself. I'm a recovering addict alcoholic, or you might just say I'm addict alcoholic. And so, from the yoga perspective, it's like, why would you keep saying that? It seems like you're just identifying with this darkness. Well, I'll tell you, I've been sober many, many years, is that one of the reasons is because denial is a part of the disease, and it's real. It's surprising how much it does, and I've heard, one of the expressions I've heard is the gifts of the program of recovery took me out of the program. Very surprising that statistically, when things go well, more people leave. More people are like, I'm good. So I was thinking of that because in Swami's expanded commentary, at the very end, he says, be humble. Be humble. And before that, he talks about, be dedicated to this. He talks about spiritual company, stay in the company of those who are striving and reaching. He says, do not hang out with people who are identifying as sinners, right? And part of the humility piece, he's saying, it can feel good to kind of feel like you're further along. It's interesting. I just take everything he says. He's saying it for a reason, right? So he says, do not do that. Change your company. If you're in company where you're the shining star, you're doing the best, you're the most advanced, time to change, time to move on. Find people ahead of you doing better than you, and be humble about it. Be humble about where you aren't. So the other thing, some years ago, I was taking some addictions counseling training, and they were talking about denial, and the professor said, it's not just addicts who struggle with that. It is, and he used diabetes as an example. He said, diabetics struggle with denial. It's one of the hardest things they deal with in terms of treatment, is they don't want to be diabetic. They don't want to, so they just will stop doing their practices. I have a student who's recently diagnosed as diabetic. And one of the things she was saying to me, and again, practices yoga, knows these teachings, she's coming to terms with how much is required to stay on track. And I thought, yeah, I know that one from recovery. I know that. I know when, but how do you do it in a way that it's not heavy? And she has a wonderful, what's that called? Endocrinologist, I guess, who said to her, my recommendation is you embrace this reality, right? Because you're going to have it forever, right? This is that's not an easy thing to hear, but embrace it with an attitude of what you can have, of what still is part of your life, what's still possible for you. You can have a wonderful, beautiful, rich life. Like, this is hard, it's not easy, but don't let it define you, right? And sometimes, because it can be so big, there's this push against. One of our affirmations that Swami talks about in terms of the power of acceptance is, with calm impartiality, I accept whatever is. And this practice that from that place, I can work with it. I can work with it. I may not like it. I'm not asked to like it. But part of the practice is to recognize when there is a like or a dislike, which is centered in the ego. It's not the highest state of awareness. But the practice I've been, that's been helpful for me is not to be troubled by that. I like when you just said at the beginning of purification, our journey with meditation is we begin with relaxation. So to be relaxed about it. Like, part of what I've seen, again, in the ministry that I have, is I had my own level of resistance around it. And over time, I came to understand I'm not doing it. It's our teaching. I'm not doing it. So it lightened me. It just lifted me to, and I was thinking of a class I was in with Jyotish and Devi on the Bhagavad Gita. And at the end of it, Devi shared with us, she said, obviously, I know these teachings, right? She said, I know these teachings. I know the promise of immortality. But as we've been going through the Gita and sharing about it and studying it together, she said, it just came to me so deeply. You guys are all going to be fine. Like, you're all good. Like, we all have the destiny of self-realization, and there just isn't anything to worry about. And she said, I didn't think I was worried, but a lightness came over her, right? This uplifted lightness of the promise of these teachings is, first off, we're already there, which it can be surprising. Like, I'm a lion, I feel like a sheep sometimes. Like, yeah, okay, notice it, move on, right? Notice it. All right, but keep affirming without denying, right, that this physical body, and so part of what Swami talks about is, he said, very few people will have material poverty and identify as wealthy. But they are, right? We are. Master Yogananda has amazing affirmations about the abundance of the universe. And if you struggle with that at all, I encourage you, look them up in scientific healing affirmations. There's some wonderful ones about, my father and I are one. I am, the wealth of the universe is mine. To be able to lift the thoughts, lift the consciousness, and invite grace in, which is the heart of our purification and all that we do, is my part, our part, is be willing, be ready, be receptive, do what I can to say, please help me awaken and remember who I am. And we are just, my goodness, back to the play. I mean, not just that, but there's so many ways in which we, I find support to remember the light and invite the light in. And that's part of what was standing out for me in preparing today, is to share that message, to how can both be true? Okay, I have a challenge. You may not feel challenged. When I came to, this comes to mind, when I came to Ananda, I was really happy in my life, I have to say. I've been sober a long time at that point and happily married to James. And, I just was picking up a tool of yoga. I didn't expect it was going to take my whole life. I didn't expect that at all. And but sure enough, it did. It did. I felt Christ's presence. I felt the strong directive, study this master, make him, your own. I mean, it was a big shift. But anyway, so I would go up to the expanding light. If you haven't been there, I recommend it. You'll feel that energy here, but it's amazing there. And one day I was coming out of a class, because a lot of what we talk about, Yogananda talked about in the teachings, is get away from this world of suffering. Right? Now, the suffering, what I've learned, is the identification with the material realm. So get away from it is, you don't have to leave the world. Most of us, that's not our path. That's not appropriate for our spiritual journey. But don't be embedded in that consciousness, even if it's going well. That's the surprise, because that can trip you up, right? The gifts of the program take me out of the program. Like, I'm good. So anyway, but I was new and trying to understand, what's the emphasis on get away from the awfulness of the material realm? It didn't seem so awful at that point. I was coming out of Serenity House, for those who might know that. And I had been thinking about it, and I was walking, and this young woman who was in a Karma Yoga program, she's like, hey, she walked up to me, right? She goes, I just want to tell you, not everybody comes to the path through suffering. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, right? And I think she'd read my consciousness. She read it. And I just looked at her, and she's like, it's okay to be really happy and follow this path. You don't have to be unhappy. You don't have to be like, oh, my life's not working, right? And I go, oh, okay. Right? Because I really came to these teachings, I would say, a happy Catholic. That's how I identified. I'm like, I'm good. I love Jesus. Life's good. I mean, I was really happy. And Jesus was saying, yeah, there's a lot more you can have. Really, there's a lot more you can have. You have scratched the surface here. So I was led into, whoa, a much bigger community of people striving for God and living in joy and affirming that without being false. Without being false. But okay. And I just watched in my own life my conversations with people, right? Because I had come from a community where it was just really common. So what are you struggling with, right? What's hard for you? And I mean, it was a way of bonding and connecting. So how to be able to be like, what if I didn't talk about that? I'll wrap up with this. James doesn't know this, but it's a sweet story about him, which comes to mind sometimes. When we started dating, and I shared this in the class because we were talking about this theme, I'd done a lot of my growth and work and everything, and I was in a pretty good place in my life, and I was happy. And so shortly after James and I met, I was having lunch with a friend and talking with a girlfriend, tell me about James. So I was describing him, and she's listening, and she said, sounds like he's really healthy. And I go, yeah. And she's like, doesn't sound like he needs anything from you. I go, nope, he doesn't. He likes being with me. He's enjoying us being together and me with him, but nope, doesn't. And she was like, wow. She couldn't comprehend it. Right? She just couldn't comprehend it. It's like, really? There's no big issue that he needs you to help him figure out and solve, and like, mm-mm. And she said, how do you do that? And I said, well, I'm doing a new thing now. I'm trying something different. How about we're both happy and fulfilled, and we're human. We have life, right? But it really brought it back to me of like, oh, so. I will now end with this. Ananda, I lovely talk of Ananda. From years ago, I heard on this little cassette tape about beware the happiness thieves, right? And so sometimes the happiness thieves are someone bringing, kind of this habit of darkness, a habit of difficulty, a habit of struggle. Hey, what's going wrong in your life, right? Or within ourselves, right? So what's it like to stay honest and stay in the light, stay uplifted in consciousness, and not have a problem I'm focused on? And that is a distinction of the conscious mind to superconscious. Conscious mind is problem solving, and in our culture, it's highly valued. They're a great problem solver, and the mind loves solving problems, right? But in yoga, that's considered problem consciousness. Problem solving, problem consciousness. Why are you thinking about problems? right? So super conscious solution orientation, whatever's going on, there is an answer. There is an answer. There is an answer. All is well. I am well. Whatever's happening with my body, whatever's going on, focused in the light, and then the divine guidance comes. And it often can come with friends, new friends. So just listen. That's my invitation. Listen for, who brings you light? Who brings you light? You see them and you're like, hey. I'm looking at Amrit because when we see each other, we always giggle. There's this spontaneous joy. So who brings that to you? And how can you bring it to yourself more? If that's relevant for you. It's been a really helpful practice for me. We are children of the light. That's the message. And may we all live in that light.